Hi everyone, and thank you so very much for checking out this video. I hope you enjoy it, and if you do, I would so very much appreciate if you would consider subscribing, as it really helps my channel gain exposure. It is quite small at the moment, and I'm doing my best to grow it, so I would appreciate if you would consider that. With that being said, if you're just here to view, I appreciate you as well. Whatever your level of support is, thank you so much for being here. So I've got another true crime case for y'all. I know I've kept you waiting a few weeks, but I am back with a bang today with a massive case that I'm sure most of you are familiar with. This is the case of Caylee Anthony. Caylee Marie Anthony is her full name, and this happened out of Florida. This was a massive case that I'm sure, like I said, most of you have heard of. I have been working on researching this case for quite some time. I found that there was so much information that it's really difficult to weed through and find what's factual and what's correct and what's not, because along with a lot of information comes a lot of inaccurate information. So sometimes it's nice when a case is not so well known, because it's easier to research with less opinions and information out there to filter through. But this case was a big one for me, Caylee Marie Anthony was born August 9th, 2005 in Orlando, Florida. Casey would remain at her parents' house throughout her pregnancy and for the first couple years of Caylee's life. Now, Jesse would remain active in Caylee's life as her father, despite having strong instincts that he was likely not her biological father. When Caylee was born in August, and Jesse learned at that time that she was a full-term baby, so 9 months, he knew that despite Casey insisting that he was Caylee's father, and even getting angry if he suggested otherwise, at 6 weeks old, Jesse would do a DNA test that would sadly determine he was not Caylee's biological father. Now, despite this fact, he says, for the first year or two of her life, I was dad. I was the father figure in her life, and I loved her more than anything. She was an amazing little baby. I had never been a father before. He was so in love with this little family, in fact, that at the end of 2005 is when he had proposed to Casey, and she said yes. Now, as a new mom, Casey seemed happy and appeared to those who knew her to be a great mom. She seemed to love Caylee and enjoy being her mother. Her focus in life was said to have been being a mother first, a wife or fiancée to Jesse second, and everything else was third. But that somewhere along the line her priorities shifted, and she was spending more and more time partying and going out with friends. She was letting her responsibilities as a mom slip to the wayside, sadly. Her and Jesse would break up in May 2006. Jesse says of that time, she told me she thought I loved Caylee more than I loved her, which was the farthest thing from the truth, and then just wanted me to be a part of Caylee's life and not be Caylee's father, as I had been from the word go. So that was heartbreaking. I didn't talk to her for 10 months before we tried to be friends again, and then we even gave it a second try in November of 2007. But I could see there was something different about her. She wasn't the same Caylee Anthony that I had chosen to spend the rest of my life with, and I broke up with her and closed the door to that chapter of my life romantically with her. But I wanted to remain a part of Caylee's life. I gotta say, one of the hardest things in dating someone who has a child is if you break up, you have to learn to be away from that child just as much as you have to learn to be away from the parent, and it's so hard. It's like a double breakup for your heart. So Jesse says of finding out that he was not Caylee's biological father, no piece of paper could tell me to love her differently, and to this day, even though I wasn't in her life, I was her father. I didn't know any other way to love her. Now, although Caylee's father was never publicly named definitively, and no DNA test was actually ever done to determine who her dad was, a man named Jesse Ortiz has been named as Caylee's possible father, and he seems the most likely. He was a 21-year-old who dated Casey before he passed away in 2007. His family was shocked by this information, as evidently he had never mentioned knowing about Caylee. They would release a statement reading in part, Miss Anthony never relationship. Unfortunately, now that Caylee is no longer with us, determining who her father is no longer possible. So Casey remained at her parents', as I mentioned before, after Caylee was born and after her and Jesse broke up. Cindy and George were very active in Caylee's life, and they seemed to really enjoy having a little one around. She seemed to bring a joy and love to the family that, as anyone with little ones knows, they bring a happiness to everyone around them. Casey would move on and be in a new relationship at the time of Caylee's disappearance, but Jesse would be the only real father figure that Caylee would ever know, and apparently his family would help Casey in raising Caylee and watching her. With that being said, it's said that there was tension between Casey and Jesse's parents. Jesse's dad evidently had concerns over the amount of time that Caylee was at their house. He evidently worked from home, and having Caylee around, although it was amazing to get to spend time with her, he said that it was a massive distraction from getting his work done at the house, because obviously kids are loud, she's going to be running around. So he had expressed these concerns to Casey, and there was apparently some tension there. Apparently there had been some discussions about Casey needing to find alternate arrangements for Caylee, and that this had put pressure on her as she didn't have very many options for childcare, being a single mom. Now this pressure was also apparently causing tension between Casey and her parents, as they noticed a shift in Casey's behavior, so much so that on Father's Day, June 15th, 2008, Casey and her mom, Cindy, evidently got into an argument. Cindy had apparently made comments about Casey's increased partying and how much time she was spending away from Caylee. She was expressing concerns that the little girl wasn't getting the attention she should from her mother. Casey would end up leaving the house that evening in a really upset state and refused to speak to her parents for the rest of the night. The following day, on June 16th, 2008, Casey would leave her parents' house with Caylee at around noon. At the time they left, Cindy had already gone to work, but George recalls that he saw them leave. When she left the house, she told her dad that she was taking Caylee to her nanny's, who she identified as Zenaida, aka Zanny Fernandez Gonzalez. The following day, Casey would text her mom saying that she was going to Tampa for a work trip, but she assured her parents that Caylee was safe, she was okay, and that the nanny was watching her. Now her parents found this strange because they were unaware that Casey had a nanny for Caylee, and they also just found the situation strange. However, Casey remains in touch with them, mostly by text message, but she continued to reassure them that everything was fine and that Caylee was okay. Cindy says, "We didn't have any reason to doubt her. I knew Casey would never put Caylee in harm's way." About a week later, George would see Casey at their house alone, and he confronted her about a couple of stolen gas cans that he noticed were gone. He asked her if she had purse along with Caylee's car seat and toys. And they all noticed a very strong smell that they commented smelled like a decomposing body. And it wasn't just George that noticed that, Cindy noticed it as well. It was very strong, apparently. Caylee's favorite doll was in the car, and Cindy recalled using Febreze and Clorox wipes to try to unsuccessfully remove the odor. Now, at this point, Cindy started looking intensely for Casey and asking her friends where she was, and she would end up finding her at her then boyfriend's house, Tony Lazaro. Cindy gets Casey to leave the apartment with her mother at that point in time, and over the next couple days, Cindy and George question Casey about where Caylee is. And Casey continues to make excuses that she's with the nanny, that she's not available, and that she couldn't talk to her. So fed up with this excuse in a month now since they've seen Caylee, on July 15th, Cindy pulls into a police station ready to get law enforcement involved. However, the police station she pulled into was closed at the time, so she makes a 911 call, the first of 3 that she would ultimately make. And she tells the dispatcher that she wanted Casey arrested for theft of money and the family's car. So she's obviously just trying to get her arrested so they can get her in custody and start getting some answers. So she would later call 911 a second time, stating again that she wanted Casey arrested, and mentioned at this time, "I have a possible missing child." She would make a third 911 call that day, and this call was prompted by Casey finally admitting to her brother Lee that Caylee had been missing for the last 31 days, so she finally comes clean with it. So it seems at this point that Cindy and George are fed up with the excuses, and as mentioned, they're doing whatever they can to get answers at this point. So when Cindy calls 911 for the third time, she says, "I found out my granddaughter has been taken. She has been missing for a month. Her mother finally admitted that she's been missing." They ask her for her location and exchange those details, of course, and Cindy says, "We're talking about a 3-year-old little girl, and my daughter finally admitted that the babysitter stole her. I need to find her." She says, "The babysitter took her a month ago. My daughter's been looking for her. I told you my daughter was missing for a month. I just found her today, but I can't find my granddaughter. And she just admitted to me that she's been trying to find her herself. There's something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car." The 911 operator asks to speak to Casey at this point in time, and Casey gets on the line. They ask her what's going on, and she says, "My daughter's been missing for the last 31 days. I know who has her. I've tried to contact her. I actually received a phone call today now from a number that is no longer in service. I did get to speak to my daughter for about a minute. They ask her about a police report filed about the stolen vehicle, and Casey confirms that her 98 Pontiac Sunfire had been stolen. Now this part confuses me. I guess she's claiming that her car that was found in the tow yard was stolen from her. So they go back to Caylee, and Casey tells them about the nanny. tells them her full name, Zenaida Fernandez Gonzalez, and that she's been Caylee's nanny for 1.5 to 2 years. They ask Casey why she hasn't called authorities sooner, as it's been 31 days since she claims to have last seen her daughter. She tells them that she's been looking for her and trying to go through other resources, which she admits was stupid. Now, shortly after this, officers arrive at the house and the 911 call ends. During questioning, Casey tells officers that Zenaida had run off with Caylee and kidnapped her. After questioning Casey, detectives find many discrepancies in her statement. Anthony's friends and family had never heard of this nanny before, and detectives were quickly able to determine there never was a nanny. The investigators caught Casey in another lie when she told them she worked at Universal Studios still, even leading them around the theme park, but finally later admitting that she had not returned to work at Universal Studios. On July 16th, 2008, Casey is arrested and charged with child neglect and giving false statements and obstruction. At this point, the case has received extreme media attention, and the whole world seemed to be looking for Caylee. The public was outraged to learn about Casey's behavior since her daughter had been missing. She is seen out, or was seen out before her arrest, partying and drinking with friends. At one point on July 3rd, 2008, which is about 2.5 weeks after she claims her daughter went missing, she gets a tattoo on her left shoulder with the words Bella Vita, which is Italian for beautiful life. When the tattoo artist who gave her the tattoo was interviewed, he recalls Casey seemed upbeat and happy during her appointment. He says she did mention at the time that her 2-year-old daughter was with her nanny. On July 22nd, 2008, Casey is declared a person of interest officially at a bond hearing. This comes after evidence is introduced indicating that cadaver dogs had zeroed in on the odor of human decomposition in the trunk of Casey's car, as well as in the Anthony family home's backyard. Casey would remain in custody until August 21st, 2008, when bounty hunter Leonard Padilla would post her $500,000 bail in the hopes that Casey would lead them to Caylee. But Casey provided no additional or helpful information, and she was back in jail only 8 days later, this time charged with forging checks and identity theft. Now, these charges were triggered by a spending spree that Casey went on in 2008, earlier in the year, shortly after reporting Caylee missing. She claims to have found the checks while borrowing her friend at the time's car. Investigators would continue to catch her in lies and are getting a pretty clear picture that Casey is not a trustworthy person and that something horrible has gone on here. They're understandably getting frustrated because they're being led on a wild goose chase. Nothing Casey is telling them is accurate or helpful, and there's just nothing coming from her that's assisting the investigation. They would be led to a vacant apartment where she claims the nanny lived. And as I mentioned, she led them around Universal Studios until finally admitting that she no longer worked there, and nothing she was telling them, as I said, obviously. Now, although they did not have a body, still, on October 14th, 2008, investigators felt confident enough with the information they had available to them to charge Casey with aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter, and 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement. In response, Casey's lawyer, Jose Baez, or Baez, it's B-A-E, says his client's actions will become clearer at trial. He says, "I sincerely believe when we have finally spoken, everyone, and I mean everyone, will sit back and say, 'Now I understand. That explains it.'" Spoiler alert, that does not happen. On October 24th, 2008, a forensics report is released that makes note of a strand of hair found in the trunk of Casey's car that is microscopically similar to those found on Caylee's hairbrush and showed characteristics of apparent decomposition. Additionally, they did a test of the air from the trunk, and it was found to apparently contain compounds consistent with human decomposition as well. On December 11th, 2008, Caylee's remains are finally found in a wooded area less than a half mile from the Anthony's home. Her remains were found inside a plastic bag with duct tape over the front of the face. Now, I have a question at this point. If she was found less than a half mile from the Anthony home, why did it take so long to find her? Let's say they did a search of this area early on and found nothing. Okay, why would they not, for one, be keeping an eye on that area if it's less than a half mile from the house? You would think with so much media attention that somebody would have seen something if someone was dumping a body there with so many people around protesting and everything. Less than a half mile is not far away. Secondly, how do we know? Did they even search this area? I should have Googled this before when I was researching, but it begs the question whether that area was searched at all. I would hope so, and that the body was just put there later on, and that's why it wasn't found for so long. But I would hate to think that it was there the whole time, and that incompetence just didn't find her sooner. But I'm not sure. I'll have to look into this, or if any of you know more information on that, please comment. But so, the duct tape on the skull. There were 3 pieces of duct tape. One was 9.5 inches, one was 9 inches, and one was 7.5 inches. When they wrapped a replica skull, it was determined the duct tape would completely cover the whole face, and that there was no way to forensically prove the duct tape was placed on Caylee's skull before or after her passing. The duct tape had a heart-shaped sticker on it, and notably, a sheet of heart-shaped stickers with many missing was removed from Casey's bedroom, and this was noted in the notes when they did the initial search of the home. A Gatorade bottle was found near Caylee's remains in a red Disney bag, and when they tested what was inside the bottle, the contents tested positive for testosterone and much so for George that on January 23rd, 2009, he was hospitalized after threatening to commit suicide. Sheriff deputies found him in a Daytona Beach motel after he'd sent family members text messages saying he didn't want to live anymore. When they found him, he had a 5-page suicide note on him that indicates he had many unanswered questions about Caylee's passing, and that he wanted to end his life to be with her because he failed her. On May 24th, 2011, so 3 years after Caylee first disappeared, Casey's trial would begin. The state of Florida was seeking the death penalty in the case against her, which the public was happy about. The public continued to watch this case closely. Online, people were extensively researching everything about this family. Like, the media was obsessed about this case, and I remember watching this case closely as well, and just being so captivated by how horrific it was. So the prosecution's case is largely circumstantial, which, as we all know, makes it very hard to get a conviction. They alleged that Casey wished to relinquish herself from her parental duties, and that she killed her daughter by giving her chloroform and duct taping her nose and mouth shut. They present Casey's strange behavior while her daughter was missing, such as lying to authorities about the nanny that never existed, as well as Caylee's whereabouts. Casey lying about working at Universal Studios and the timing of her beautiful life tattoo. They present the findings of the cadaver dogs and the hair findings in the trunk of the car, as well as how the word chloroform had been searched over 80 times, apparently, on Casey's password-protected laptop. Although Cindy Anthony would take the stand and claim she was the one who had done the searches, and that she was researching chlorophyll, which was a pigment found in plants. Now, I would maybe believe that if there was only one search done for chloroform, but there were multiple, so I don't know how you can use that defense. Prosecutors would point out that during depositions, Cindy never mentioned any of this, and that the times when it was searched for on the computer are times when Cindy was at work, according to her work logs. Cindy would come back and say that sometimes she would leave her work and it wasn't on the work logs, and that it was her who searched for that. Additional search history on the laptop would come up with foolproof suffocation, neck breaking, and death. Although Casey claims the whole family knew her laptop password, video evidence contradicts this, because in surveillance cameras from the jail, we see her parents asking Casey for her laptop passwords and telling her that the passwords that they thought they weren't working. she said. But he didn't rush to call 911, and he wasn't trying to resuscitate her. She says, I collapsed with her in my arms. She was heavy and she was cold. Now keep in mind that back when Caylee was originally interviewed in 2008, she is recorded on video denying to officers that Caylee had drowned accidentally in the pool, so she's contradicting herself again. And that version of events doesn't align with her initial statements. The defense would also argue that the tattoo Caylee got was a way of commemorating her daughter because she had drowned 2 weeks earlier. I don't believe that version of events, by the way. Also, in George's suicide note, he mentions how he has unanswered questions about Caylee's passing. If he had actually found her like that, then what unanswered questions would he have? He would know what happened. At the trial, the defense also accuses George as well as Lee of having molested Caylee growing up. I'm not going to touch too much on these allegations because they're completely baseless in my opinion. I hate discrediting her, but at the same time, she's a known liar. And I don't think you ever want to not believe someone coming forward with allegations like this. But I also think in this situation, she's very obviously doing it to try and garner sympathy and twist the story to match her negative. So I'm not going to talk too much about this, but no one ever witnessed anything like this or any signs of this happening to Caylee, and no evidence was ever found to support this. After almost 6 weeks of testimony and 400 pieces of evidence presented in court, the jury of 7 women and 5 men takes less than 11 hours to reach a verdict. July 5th, 2011, the jury found Caylee not guilty. I repeat, not guilty of first-degree murder, aggravated manslaughter, and aggravated child abuse, citing the mostly circumstantial evidence presented. So she was found guilty of none of those charges, shockingly. She was, however, found guilty of 4 counts of providing false information to law enforcement authorities, and thus sentenced to 4 years in jail and $4,000 in fines. 2 of the false information counts would later be thrown out in appeals court. So Anthony ultimately received credit for time served and good behavior. Having been imprisoned for 3 years and 1 day, she was released on July 17th, 2011. She was required to be on probation for a year due to the check fraud charges and was ultimately billed with more than $200,000 to law enforcement related to the search of Caylee. The trial of Caylee Anthony was one of the most widely watched criminal trials in history. According to Nielsen research, an estimated 40 million Americans tuned in to the proceedings, and almost 100 million people across the globe watched the verdict be announced. Many in the public and the media were outraged by the not guilty verdict, comparing it at the time to the O.J. Simpson trial. The aftermath of the trial brought about a slew of bills in several states for Caylee's law, which would make it a felony for a parent or legal guardian not to report a child missing. In 2000, Associated Press. In it, she admitted to lying to the police and spoke about the public's perception of her. She says, "Based off what was in the media, I understand the reasons people feel about me the way they do. I understand why people have the opinions that they do." In a November 2022 documentary titled Caylee Anthony, Where the Truth Lies, she would again accuse her father of being the one who found Caylee deceased and of abusing them both. She says, "He'd put a pillow over my face and smother me to knock me out." That happened several times. I'm sure there were times when I was incapacitated as a child where my body was limp and lifeless. George vehemently denies the accusations he always has, and as I mentioned, there's never been any evidence to support these allegations, and he has never been charged. Now, with regards to Casey's claims that Caylee drowned in the family pool, her mom Cindy says, "What the F was she thinking? Why the heck didn't she tell us if that happened? Why didn't she call someone? None of this would have happened." And it's like, oh my gosh, she put us through hell. I know if I had found Caylee drowned in the pool, I would have been devastated and blamed myself for the rest of my life. A source close to the family tells People magazine that Cindy still holds resentment towards her daughter for the aftermath of Caylee's disappearance and her claims in the trial. This anonymous source goes on to say she is still angry a lot of the time. This was a loving grandmother who had to withstand family trauma that no one should ever have to deal with. So when she starts talking about Casey and Caylee, she gets really upset even now. In 2024, George and Cindy are filmed taking a lie detector test during an interview. And one of the questions George was asked was if he knew or concealed Caylee's whereabouts during the case. He hesitates but would ultimately say no, and when asked why he hesitated, he said it was because Caylee was found so close to his house. "I was just visualizing the woods where she was found. I'm sorry, he said. Now Cindy says at the time, "Yes, I believe Casey knows what happened, 100%. I kept hoping, upon hope, that she would confess," Cindy said in the documentary, "and that's the only reason I've been putting myself through all of her trauma and everything." Casey has said, with regards to the media attention she's received because of Caylee's death and the accusations against her, "I don't give an ish about what anyone thinks about me. I never will," she told the Associated Press. "Based off what was in the media, I understand the reasons people feel that way about me. I'm okay with myself," she continued. "I sleep pretty good at night." As of 2025, Casey remains in Florida, and she's come out publicly to call herself a legal advocate and researcher, saying, "I am a legal advocate, I am a researcher. I've been in the legal field since 2011, and in this capacity, I feel that it's necessary if I'm going to continue to operate appropriately as a legal advocate that I start to advocate for myself and also advocate for my daughter. My goal is to continue to help give a voice to people, to give people tools and resources that they can utilize." It seems that Casey and her parents, as of now, still seem to have a difficult relationship and don't speak often, if at all. Her parents have publicly stated that they do not believe upset. And Caylee would say, "Is that Jesse?" And then she'd get on the phone with me and there'd just be gibberish. But I could be having the most